Welcome to another episode of Intuitive Discussions with Dummies. And by dummies, we refer to your hosts. I am Corey, most intuitive dummy.
And I'm Zach. I'm so dumb, I once failed a survey.
Zach, what is Intuitive Discussions with Dummies?
Corey, we like to talk about some of the issues that face consumers in debt review and the debt review industry as a whole. Today, we're looking a little bit at the reputation of debt review and the difference between maybe debt review, debt counseling, and what happens next in the process. Should we be calling it by different names? Should we be looking at a rebrand? Do consumers trust the process? So we're going to get into some of that today. We're looking forward to speaking to some of our guests from various associations across the industry, and I'm excited to introduce them. Let's go to our first guest.
Thanks, Zach. I'm representing National Debt Counseling Association today. I chair the association and have done so for the last few years. I've been in the debt management industry since 2013.
Hi, I'm Casper Grange. Been a debt counselor and in the debt counselling industry since 2009. And I'm an NEC member of the CASA Debt Counselling Association South Africa.
Yes, I'm Tiaan, CEO of IPDA. Also, like many of the people on the call today, a man of many hats, also chair of PDASA, but in my capacity today here, only IPDA.
Hi, I'm Reinhardt Pettenburger. I'm from Debt Therapy. I'm the current owner of Debt Therapy, been running it for the last 20 years. And on top of that, I'm also happen to be the CASA president. Now, the CASA stands for the Debt Counselling Association of South Africa. Something that I believe that all debt counsellors should belong to.
So if you're the president, do we have to stand up? Is there any do we have to put our hands over our heart? How does it work?
Unfortunately, it's too late. You didn't stand up in time. You will be dealt with later.
Well, welcome, guys. Thank you for joining us on another podcast. We really appreciate it. So I think let's start firing away. I think I'm going to ask this question to you, Casper. The role of a debt counselor. Are we just another business or are we actual heroes?
I believe a true debt counsellor is a hero, but over the years it's been skewed. Our industry has gone all types of ways, and unfortunately the easiest thing to shout out is the negative, and the positive stories have faded in the background. A debt counsellor is a hero, but he or she also needs to run a business. We've got the guys that need to run a business, but the heart of it is if you don't look at the consumer, it's going to close your doors very, very quickly. So delivering proper debt counselling service can really be good, not only for the consumer, but for your business as well. Unfortunately, due to our fees, due to our funds, the numbers play a big role. And we see the heart of small DCs not being able to sustain that, to run a proper business. And if you can't run a proper business, then, you can't provide a proper service. So it's hand in glove. By running a good business, you're going to provide proper debt counselling. And if you don't run a proper debt counselling, time will tell and close your doors as well.
Yeah, I think this is one of the challenges that every business faces at the moment. But we want sustainable practices in the industry. And this is something we're often concerned about. We talk about fees and sustainability, bringing on new clients and stuff. What does it mean to you if we say, Benay, let's go across to you, a hero, right? What is a hero to the consumer when it comes to debt review? We just use that word.
I suppose it depends on who you ask. In my opinion, it's someone who is there at the time of need to help them see through the finances and making the debt repayments more affordable. By virtue of that, I think you find that people get this feeling of euphoria, say, you're my hero. And, you saved me from, let's be honest, in many situations from certain death, suicide, financial ruin, bad health, whatever it might be, often really hard to know. Generally, you would find the hero coming in and swooping you with better life promises. If people do stick to it, it actually does become much better. At that moment, when they are feeling despair, it definitely is the hero. So over time, I think that changes a bit. People get complacent and forget where they were. I think that's typical amnesia for everyone, including ourselves. We tend to have a recency bias and only retain things that have happened a few seconds ago. So I think it's human nature. No one wants the consumers to go back to where they were before in terms of their dark times.
Yeah, from a PD perspective, what would you say?
From a PDA side, we actually get the consumer once you guys have done all the heavy lifting. I had the recent opportunity to be part of a debt counselor speaking to the clients, and I realized there's so much work that you guys are putting in before a consumer reaches us. So by the time they are reached, as they have been triaged, they have been bandaged, they have been introduced into debt counseling, and hopefully with sufficient information. But so from our side, normally we get the consumer at the point where they are starting to pay by debt review and hopefully starting to reap the rewards of the process.
Let's talk about the other end of the journey. We're hoping that the consumer is sorted out their debt, right? They're ready for a clearance certificate. Do you think we do enough to prepare them for what happens next? Or do we hand them the certificate and then say, fly free? Are we doing enough to prepare people for what comes next?
Can I take this one?
Go.
So, Zach, firstly, clearance, we must just change the wording a little bit. I know that's what we call it, but the reality is that we help you deal with one source of burden, which is your debt. But you're always going to need credit in life. I think that we just need to be realistic about that. It shouldn't be like this event that someone just pops out a birthday cake and says, surprise, you get a clearance, and then the guy has a heart attack. It's something that you work towards. What I find is consumers are very engaged in the beginning. They want to know everything, which is great. They want to know how's this going to impact me, what's going to happen to my payments, this, that, and the other. After a period of time, whether that's 3 months or 6 months or 12 months, when things are working and running order, then there's less engagement. I think closer to the time, everyone starts getting agitated. Reality is consumers don't want to be debt counseling a minute longer than they have to, in their view, and then to get very agitated. So I think how you prepare people is more sort of constant communication, but you can only communicate to someone if they're willing to receive the communication. You can try all you want and bombard people, and often they'll kind of ignore you. Debt counselors, in my experience, do a good job of keeping people informed. PTAs do a great job of giving them monthly statements and showing them how it's working towards the end. Consumers, those who actually invest and engage, it doesn't come as big of a shock because they would have made the behavioral changes required to put themselves in a sustainable position. It's those who hadn't made the behavioral changes where the surprise comes up. And I mean, those are the guys who get really, really surprised and really hard to kind of reconcile.
I do agree. Consumer goes in and we do the debt counseling. They need to adjust. If I look at pre-COVID into the debt review space, we tended to see consumers after they had some significant increase in income, a bonus, new job, they started living up to that lifestyle. And we're starting to see that habit forming last year again, where after that increase, living up to the Joneses, they're now used to that lifestyle. And in essence, a consumer exiting debt review, we're doing the same thing. They suddenly have, and in some cases, it's substantial. Our biggest consumers, 40, 60,000 suddenly available because their debt's paid off. Oh, maybe they still have a home loan to pay for, but now all of that money is available. So the first thing they jump onto, what in your house, which is great. But the financial education still needs to happen. And, that's the debt counseling part. The question now arises after clearance, should we not have touch points to educate, keep the consumer educated, keep budgeting in mind and have a session with them, have a sit down with your financial planner and debt counseling. Actually, we should go hand in hand because debt planning and wealth planning is going hand in hand. You don't want that guy to go on pension with 3 million rand in debt again, do you? So I think we can do a lot more. I think there is still space. But remember, debt review is really in its infant stage if you look at any form of legislation worldwide. It's up to us, industry leaders, to put those plans in place, to have those touching points for consumers. But I think there should be more done with that clearance part, a proper sit down, a proper touch point with a financial planner or wealth planner, whatever, so that they don't end up with their counselors again. Yes, it's brilliant for our businesses to have guys entering again. But in the bigger scheme of things, is that our job? Our job is to get consumers back into the credit market, to rehabilitate them back into the credit market, that they don't end up there again. And if we can create that trust, even from banking side, I mean, how much easier would it be for banks to start sending consumers to debt counseling, knowing that once this guy's done with debt review, we've got a client for life again, having a bond, having a car. And chances are they're not going to enter in the debt review space. Unfortunately, I don't think we're there yet. So there's still a lot to be done, but it's positive. I think it's very positive in the direction we are going. And it's positive for the thousands and thousands of consumers that are back into the credit market thanks to debt review. They didn't lose their houses. They didn't lose their cars. Well done, and keep it up. But yeah, we can do a lot more in that space.
Should we make a distinction between these terms? Terminology does matter. We're talking about debt review. Debt counselors do this. It's the thing that consumers call the whole process. How do we define debt review versus debt counseling? And is there enough counseling in the counseling? What do you think?
Zach, I think you should start aiming these questions. Who are you asking them to? I just jump in here, and I think Benay has a lot of very good points on this topic as well. My viewpoint is, Zach, me and you had this discussion a while ago. I think the idea of debt review and the exit period, a cool down period, Benay has also brought that up a lot, which I think is positive, made me think, because that wasn't my viewpoint originally. But I think reviewing a consumer's debt doesn't mean they necessarily need debt counseling. Yes, we can restructure their debt and assist them, but maybe that cooling off period should be the debt review part of it. We're reviewing your debt. That doesn't put you under debt review. Yes, it's not technically now what's happening. And debt counseling is the part where the consumer needs counseling. And yes, we do the magnificent part in restructuring the debt and saving that guy from losing his house and his car. But yeah, I think there should be we should be able to distinguish. Currently, we can't. I mean, currently, what is debt review? What is debt counseling? Currently, debt review is a swear word. If you go out there and you ask consumers debt review, oh no, please, no, don't put me under that thing. But yes, we are restructuring the debt. We are saving lives, but then we need to do it correctly. We need to supply the counseling part. We need to get that guys to the other side of the line. And when they're done, you've got a happy consumer. You've got a family that benefits massively. And I mean, here we are sitting in the Eastern Cape. It's not just one family. It's a minimum of 6 miles and fed by that salary. So we have a significant role to play. There must be a distinction between the terms. And we don't know yet what those terms are. But here we are having these discussions. Let's create those terms.
Benay?
I think my views on this topic are probably neither debt review nor debt counseling elevates what we do to the technical pedestal it needs to be elevated to. You're dealing with technically very complex set of credit agreements, and you're getting them restructured in such a way that everyone is happy, or almost everyone is happy. Maybe not happy in a delighted way, but happy is like, okay, fine, it works for me type of way. It's a multi-party negotiation that is technically quite complex. When you say review, it sounds like last run, we'll just review what we've done, but there's no obligation. When you say counseling, it also implies that you can give it up whenever you want. Neither of those terms actually imply that there is a restructured set of credit agreements that are binding to the individual and to creditors in a legal sense. And it's basically going to set them off on a course where their debt burden permanently is cut down to its size to like if it was 100, now it's like 25, 30. I personally don't like either of the terms, as Zach, are there, of course, in the National Credit Act. But I think when we articulate what we're doing, I find things that are debt management, restructuring, far more instructive in terms of explaining to people what it is. Counseling implies something that you can start and stop when you want. And review implies just an hour you spend with somebody. I think it's a lot more than that. So I think to convey the obligation on everyone involved and the benefits, we probably need to think of somewhat different terms as well.
Because of the wording of the Act, we actually register people with the NCR at the wrong time. We should be registering them once we've already looked at their situation and we know whether they need this thing or not. You have any thoughts on that?
Casper made the point that you look at people's finances and not everyone is a candidate for what we do. When you speak to people from other countries about how our system works, and you highlight to them this, let's call it this registration part of the consumer's details in such a way that it bars them from accessing new credit or credit cards, they think it's a genius idea in the sense that actually it reinforces the message that you are here to focus on relinquishing this burden of debt that you created for yourself. To be able to do that, you mustn't be distracted by other shiny things which would come in the way of, new credit. So I think, the whole registration part for me is quite important, quite powerful. And it shows now, like when in the process it's done and how soon all of that, I actually don't know, don't necessarily have a view on it. But the fact that you can kind of run that, at the same time as paying down the debt, I think it's actually quite a powerful thing.
Can I jump in there, Corey?
Yeah, go.
I think it's a very interesting point, Benay. And I think if we go read section 86 and see what was the intention of the legislature, I just think there's a movement of a little part in the act when we register it on DHS. Let's be honest, it's registered on the NCR's debt help system. That is the predicament. Where do we get a cooling off stage? Consumer Science Form 16, RCMA 71s, I do my investigation as a debt counsellor. But if we can move that goalpost and say a consumer only gets registered once a 17.2 acceptance or B or C is issued, only then as a consumer registered, it will give the consumer a cooling off period to allow that space for them to say, okay, wait, maybe I was over eager. It also allows time to see what the legislator's intention was. It to block the consumer caught in limbo. So if we move that section when you register a consumer just to 86 in the Act, 86.6, that will give us the cooling off period for the consumer, allowing the consumer's rights to rethink what's happening. It allows the debt counsellor to do a proper investigation without registering a consumer on the credit bureaus, but it also blocks him from going to other debt counsellors because you're doing, so they can't just jump. So it applies the Act and it applies the consumer's rights all in one, just by moving one sentence when they get registered on the credit bureau. I think that can be a massive move for industry and consumer rights. If we can just make that little change, it can have a massive impact.
Been in the debt counselling industry for a while, knows that we're not just debt counsellors, we're also marriage counsellors and all kind of counsellors, so counselling kind of fits into the whole industry. But Tiaan, do you have any thoughts around this subject?
Counseling. No. But I think what I love about these discussions, it's a bit challenging for me in the sense that you guys are challenging my thoughts of, we are at the end of the process. We're getting a consumer when you guys have onboarded it. And so I realize that more of these discussions and probably more participants to these discussions will help educate everybody in the process. I've been in the industry since 2014, but you guys haven't been speaking about cool-off periods, and I'm running through these things, which I've heard, but then I'm starting to apply it. And then I realized that you all have a point. I actually, at the beginning of this discussion, thought that the cooling off period is 90 days before they end debt review. Do we start almost cooling off from debt review? From a BDA side, our systems are powerful enough to start let's call it a review period before we release you out of this debt restructuring that we've onboarded you on. And that doesn't necessarily need to run through, it could run through the systems as it is, but then allow that consumer a bit of time before he gets his clearance certificate to make sure, am I ready for the next steps? Can I cool off before actually entering the big world again? I would normally say if we look at how we prepare our kids, even if they grow up, if they've fallen, you normally have your hands just on either side if they've just fallen off the bicycle. And I think that guidance, preparing them for a credit world again, making sure that they are not going to bump their heads. And I know that most consumers, not necessarily, it's not their fault that they need to do that. There are things outside of their controls like medical bills and things that they didn't necessarily plan, but just to make sure that they are prepped before they go to the next steps.
All right. Finally, we also want to go to you. How do we grow the debt counselling industry and how do we strengthen the industry?
I was approached to how do we grow the industry? Now, everyone that knows me, Benay is probably wondering, why on earth are you asking Riney where you're struggling to grow anything at the moment? For advice on growing in the industry, I think number one is all the work that has been done by the Debt Dummies is the first port of call. I'd especially get them to sort of go into, have a read about those things and have a look at how you can actually increase your sort of footprint by doing very simple things that aren't going to cost you a fortune. From that aspect, I'd certainly recommend that people go through those. But there are also other approaches that you can do, and it's about looking outside of the box. We all know that advertising, Google, TikTok, and Facebook are so saturated by so many that only the big guys have the finances to really make use of search engine optimizations. So, and other ways we can do it is go speak to HR departments. It's not the easiest. At the end of the day, it's about picking up a phone and going from one HR department to another, pick your area, and then see if you can get an appointment to speak to one of those HR, especially those larger companies up in Atlantis, where they're generally that you go in. I mean, I've managed to see HR departments at Woolworths, etc. HR are willing to listen to you, so you can do it. Other thing is approach some of the financial institutions, those that are lending money, especially in the microfinance where they're slightly smaller. You can go to those and say, listen, let's do a deal. Anyone that you cannot service, please send them my way, because it could be a potential client for myself, and arrange a sort of a swap. If they convert, then we'll pay you X amount of commission. And then any client that comes to us, people don't read what they're advertising, and you can forward that on to them. So it's about making use of these sort of parts in life, and just constantly look out where there's an opportunity. For example, just your car, just get some magnets you put in your car to promote your business, just get seen. Right, I recommend that you go to community halls. Quite a few community halls are available where people want to discuss radio shows. I'm pretty much on the radio twice a month. I know, Casper, I think you've got a regular slot 2 or 3 times a week. It's a matter of just getting your name out there, right? I mean, if you're just going to sit and pray that people are going to come to you, that is not the case. You need to be up and active and go speak to these companies to see if you can do business with them to help their employees, wellness days, etc. People always need wellness days.
And maybe you think that debt review has in many ways become data capturing on these beautiful systems that we have. We have these amazing systems from the system providers. Do you think that's become most of what debt review is at the moment? Somebody pumping numbers and figures into a machine and then emailing somebody.
To a certain extent, yes, I think that could be, it's a data processing, but the problem lies, it's the data processors are generally not within the industry. They will get all that information, forward it out to, or sell it to a debt counselor. But where the problem lies, I think we have a lot of very good debt counselors, and we have, unfortunately, there's a small percentage of rogue debt counselors. Now, those rogue debt counselors, and I believe it's between 5 and 10%, have caused a tremendous amount of damage to our industry as such. So, yeah, what's important is where our consumers don't realize that by signing a form, they're actually signing themselves up under debt review. If we want to get ourselves out of this data putting exercise, or just putting it's about, of course, getting the education right. We need input from the NCR to have a lot more education on the debt review space and what it's all about. That way we can lower that. At the end of the day, we shouldn't be calling the client directly. The client should be contacting us. That's how the Act actually stands. We shouldn't be in a position where we can buy lists. We can do our advertising, but people should come to us naturally, not that we actually actively going out there and calling them. I mean, that's how it was generally set up. And the biggest problem is now you can buy lists and you can just call anyone. So, and Popia doesn't seem to be doing a great deal for us here in South Africa. Well, I think that's all I can really add to it. So, Benay, I'm sure you've got about 10 million other things to add.
I suppose it depends on how you answer your previous question about the industry. I think there's a need to rebrand the industry. That's why I've been harping on debt management rather than debt counseling or debt review. Move it out of the negative space that it's been. All of the things Reinhardt said contribute to it. It's to basically position it as a partner to consumers and also credit providers and make it a triple win. I think that's the challenge in terms of moving the industry to the right space. At the same time, many people don't know about the magic of what we do can help. This morning, I was listening to a MoneyWeb article. The Finmark Trust released their annual survey, and they say there's 12 million people who are over indebted. Now, I didn't get into detail of how they determine that or whether that's accurate or not. But the point is, the reach and relevance of this industry could be very consequential, if it's sort of going to the right places. But at the moment, it doesn't, due to a number of own goals, but also a number of blockages. Creditors don't necessarily want to always participate because, it's less for them in the immediate vicinity, even though in the long term it's more. So, it's demonstrating the long-term value to the people involved. And, how do you take the word out to people? I mean, with respect, I'm going to disagree with Reinhardt that we shouldn't contact people because people don't know you exist and you've got something they can benefit from you. You don't know whether they will or they will not. It's not to say that you contact them sort of legitimate ways, but there must be ways of reaching more people who don't know about what one does. So it needs to be done in a tactful way without violating any regulations. People need to know such a solution exists. Otherwise, it goes amiss and it goes completely untapped. That's how I would think about growing this.
I'm thinking of exactly what Benay and them are saying is debt review is not buying a coffin. It's not a grudge purchase. But I think if you speak to most people, that is their understanding of assisting you in a specific time in your life and actually safeguarding your assets. That's the big thing. But I do think that Benay is right to say is we do need to have a look at the rebranding. We only have 245,000 paying consumers. I know that there's most likely a lot more registered people for debt review, but from a PDA side, we are seeing a bit of growth, and that might be natural growth of almost moving or collecting 1.8 billion rand per month. But we want to see that grown specifically from our side. I think one of the things is we are more from a transactional nature involved in this. We would love to see how we could partner and grow. But one of the key things is education. Benay now said is we actually need to pick up the phone, and consumers need to understand that this is a solution for them. And how do we do that? Fortunately, I think we're sitting with a portion of the panels here with the CASA and the National Debt Counselling Association. But I do think that the banks, the credit providers, the microfinances, all of these different calls is a portion, but we actually need to have the people when Bob can't pay his Bob and Sue. They would need to be willing to say, listen, you need to go to an accredited debt counselor. So not any guy. We don't want to let them go to the guys that are ruining their reputations. We want them to actually go to people that the banks trust. How do we start funneling trust back into the industry that will actually grow the industry? I think that's fundamental. And that happens with education and engagement. Benay, you said something, and this has most likely been done, but I haven't seen it. But how does a credit provider know what the benefits of debt review is? So you said the long term, and if you actually go to most of them and when we are engaging them, they do see the benefits of debt review. But if they're speaking as industry forums, then normally it's seen as a grudge. And it's most likely seen as a grudge because of the 5 to 10% Reinhardt that you're referring to. But it's how do we start in that perspective to actually get more people to start using the solution?
And just to add something to what you said, I should have qualified what I said about growing the industry, contacting people. So in the ideal world, the people who are custodians of the National Credit Act, meaning the DTI and NCR, would actually educate consumers about what debt counseling could do for them in the ideal world. That doesn't happen. You have a bit of a negative selection there. Then you have the negative marketing that comes on top of that from other participants and other registrants of the NCR against what you're doing. Now, in any other place, if a group of registrants or a financial authority spoke ill about another set of registrants, particularly ones where they provide the much needed debt remedy solution, those people will be taken to task. This does not happen in our context. Also does not happen that consumers are actually shown, that such a thing as counseling exists. Never mind the fact that over 2 million people have used it, by the way, since it's been advocated. What are you meant to do? You're meant to grow the industry and the business. You on your own. I think that's kind of where we are, because the incentives are not aligned with the other participants to grow it together. So you're stuck with growing it alone. So that's where my comment was coming from, Reinhardt. In absence of consumer financial education that should take place from all government departments, by the way, which all have big budgets, and also all the financial services institutions that are meant to spend 1% of their net profit on financial education, all of that gets discussed. So in absence of that, you kind of lift the fence for yourself. So I think that's where my comments are coming from a growth perspective and rebranding perspective.
Benay, Reinhardt, I think there's definitely valid points. And I think I'm going to educate you, Benay, on something that is busy. What do we need to do? We need to get trust in this. But I mean, currently debt review is a swear word. That's why we want to rebrand. We want to take it away. So what if at schools they educate consumers, listen, if you're in trouble, you need to go see a debt counselor. This is now long term. And I can tell you that that project is currently happening by the Department of Economic Development. So that is currently being brought into schools. And that's a long-term aspect we need to look at. Our predicament is, once again, we are hurting ourselves. And correctly, Benay, we've got other industry players shouting, don't do debt review. That's why CIF is created. We should take this up in CIF, and those industry guys should be taken to task. I'm 100% with you. Why? But we too need to use the correct words here, because Zach is going to utilize this. We need to address it, but we can't be shy anymore to address these things and take it head on as a collective, as NDA, as the CASA, and bring this up. This is a touch point in CIF. Why are you publishing it? And then once again, we keep on hearing road debt councils, and we keep on falling back to the old things. So tell us who they are. And the only way we're going to do this is to enforce compliance. We can only get that done through the regulators. Number one, if we want to have growth, we need to create trust. How do we create trust? How do we get the consumer out there? When the popo hits the fan, why are we the last thought? How do we change that mindset? Through education, yes, through cold calling, but that's not always the best education form. We need to get those forms. And there's a lot of things out there that we're not getting involved with as industry to get the education out there. There's multiple touch points we can get a lot more involved with, including talking to the other industry guys that are shouting negatively, but they've got a right to shout negatively because we create that. So interagency collaboration, we should be collaborating. I mean, there's a reason why a Mercedes and an Audi open up next door. They don't hurt each other by opening up next door. They actually do each other's brands better. So we as industry can grow our industry by working together. There is space for the big debt council. There is space for the medium guys, but we need to create trust between us. The interagency collaboration is a definite thing for me. And then we need to, elevate our standards so that it isn't just a data capturing situation. There needs to be a voluntary code of excellence that is forced down through regulation. Be harder on the associations by the regulator, and everybody must belong to an association. But then the NCR can jump on the association and say, listen, you are chasing on nonsense and we deal with you in that space. I think that will be a great starting point. Peer reviews, we've got that. Debt review awards, we've got that. But I think we need to create more transparency right through industry, because there's always so much mistrust has been created over the years in our industry. How do we even trust each other? You walk out the room and you don't know if you can trust if boss is going to do what boss is saying. And I'm throwing that name out there, but I'm not just talking about them. We need to also create that trust internally. Yes, compliance is a big thing that is massively lacking. How can a debt counsellor be deregistered and 2 years later be re-registered? I mean, that's just a potload of nonsense. So let's clean up our industry. Let's create trust. How nice would it be if a court sends you 1,000 matters a week to a small debt counsellor? Oh, brilliant. I'm going to be too busy to even think about marketing out there. But then we've created trust. The Act allows for that to happen, but there's no trust. So it's now up to us to clean that through education, through communication, through the media houses, through talking together, through collaboration, and not just be a checklist and forms and numbers, and really assist the consumer and get them back into the credit market. So all the banks start shouting, if you're in trouble, go to a debt counsellor, because you know what? You're going to come back to me in 2 to 3 years. Brilliant. How nice would that be? I think that is how we change just debt counselling being transactional. That is where debt review is going to be the word that people trust in to sort out their situation.
Okay, so I'm going to come back to this thought. Tiaan, I'm quite convinced that every now and then you get someone who gets hold of you and says, I think IPDA is my debt counselor. True or false?
We get that a lot, unfortunately.
Yeah. So what I'm just to ask our three debt counselors here, we're talking about consumer education for the regulator or the DTI. But if your own consumers don't even know the name of their debt counselor, doesn't that mean that perhaps the people who are going through the process are not really being involved in the process? They're not really taking note of it. They're not being given the agency within the process to grow. And people just being dragged through this process, they kind of line up a bit clear, they get themselves in the situation, they lose track of who's their debt counselor, who's their attorney, they have no idea. And eventually they're phoning Tiaan and saying, hey, Tiaan, I don't know what's happening with my debt review. You must please help me. Do you think that's a common problem, or do you think that's maybe on a debt counselor by debt counselor basis? Reinhardt, let's go to you. You said some debt counselors certainly have been underperforming. Do you think it's only that, or do you think this happens maybe across the industry? We're not educating consumers enough.
Well, I mean, we're certainly not educating consumers enough, but I do believe everything goes down from one debt counselor to another. I know I've had it in the past where they've called me hyphen, and I said, no, I'm not hyphen, I'm therapy. And I know the confusion comes because they receive their statements from hyphen or IPDA or whatever. So they might just fall into that. But I think it's important that for your consumers, that debt counselors should also have at least a newsletter that goes out once a quarter to their particular members, stating what's happening, so we keep in touch with them. And a lot of that doesn't happen, especially with some of the debt counselors. They'll just get signed up and then they get forgotten. As for Casper, your comments earlier would be great, but we need the NCR to actually do their job. And then we'll actually be in this position where we can actually grow and move forward. That's the crux that has been holding us back all these years. So there's no compliance. Oh, when they do that compliance, I get fined because I've got some old thing on my website. This was years back. I didn't change the fees on the website. And that was just that upfront fee of $50 and became $75, which I never charged anyway. But I landed up getting into a lot of trouble for that. But yet, when you report somebody that's just stolen 20,000, nothing happens. Or they visit them and then just leave and never come back again. The busters, that's before your time, where they came guns blazing into your offices trying to make a huge stance, which fell flat on their faces. We need the NCR to really embrace us, all right? And if we can get them at least to establish and insist on associations, then the associations can actually take on the bulk of this work, because the associations would then be able to employ more people to actually do compliance, maybe eventually just have one massive association that everyone belongs to and have that run independently. These are the things that we need to move forward towards. That's my opinion.
That gets easy to get caught up in generalization. So I want us to be careful that we don't make it sound like every one of thousands of consumers calls Tiaan and says, you are my debt counselor. Let's take a step back and not get carried away. I think what we said at the beginning, people who are involved and informed, and it requires to tango, right? It's not just us doing something. It's like a coaching relationship. You can impose yourself saying, I'm your coach. If that person isn't willing to be coached, you're going to get nowhere. One needs to recognize that of the population of consumers who join, there is a subset of consumers who were never serious about it, and they were buying time, or whatever the reason, they were not that interested. There's also a subset of consumers who may not have fully understand the implications in the beginning. This happens, right? You go and buy the wrong thing from the shop. It happens all the time. So let's not pretend like we are in some sort of, in a different universe. People move in any other financial services. People move between one provider to another because of lack of service and all of that. We mustn't wish that we are in a different universe. You're going to get consumers who are confused and don't know the name of their debt counselor. Is it all 250,000 consumers? Absolutely not. You're going to hear about those, just like on the likes of Hello Peters. It's always going to be the consumers who have a negative grudge against you that are going to be much more vocal. There's something called the silence of the happy majority. Majority of the people are fine. You don't hear from them because they're fine. But, you only hear from the people who are not farming. So I'm not diminishing the importance of everything that's been said. But one also needs to put things into context. I think we need to realize that our industry is only 15 years old, still maturing. It's very early. Credit has been around for hundreds of years. I mean, check when the oldest the bankers in the world. I mean, they've been around for hundreds of years. For us to mature, we're going to need a few more decades. I think we need to recognize all of those things. It takes time. I think we need to make sure that the positive messages are not getting sort of diminished by the few negative detractors.
I agree. So I think, Benay, it's we do get the calls. It doesn't mean that that's the majority. I think that's a clear thing. Of course, from our side, we're starting to look from our side as are there indicators of when a PDA should start touching base with the consumer as well. And those touch bases is not to remember the primary that's actually dealing with or would has the relationship with the consumer remains the debt counselor. What we are realizing is from our side, from an IPA side, there might be specific indicators for us that we can use data for to actually say it's now time for us to actually just make sure that we remind or nudge the consumer to say, listen, you're getting closer to your debt review end. You've done fantastic. You're still here. If you have concerns, this is the numbers that you need to dial. So I'm in full agreement with you. This is not the norm, but some consumers do get confused. It is that regular touch base that I believe is required, and every debt counseling firm does that a bit differently. If you are doing that well enough, I think even if a consumer has completed their cycle, if you're still using those people and still nudging and informing, they'll actually come back. The hope is they've been rehabilitated and don't need debt review again. But if you are touching base with them and become that trusted source of information, I'm in agreement with you.
Yeah, I wanted to add something earlier, Tiaan. I think something that's a little bit different today than, again, 15 years ago. It's the fact that availability of credit is much, much easier for people, online and otherwise. The size of credit is much bigger than it was before. And I think one needs to recognize that you will have consumers, to Zach's earlier question, we never got it answered. Some people will come back for a second time around for different reasons entirely, okay? And that's the recognition that life happens. So what if someone pays down their debt, removes the burden, and in 5 years' time, something else happens to them that was completely unexpected and come and seek your help again? Isn't that a wonderful thing? I think that's a wonderful thing. As some politician might say, it's a big, beautiful thing. We have to see it in a bigger perspective. We mustn't pretend, again, like I'm speaking for myself, we mustn't wish and pretend that this is a once-off interaction in one's life. If you want to, and I've been listening to everyone, we all want to become relevant in people's lives beyond debt counseling. How are we going to do that? It's tough, right? Not that easy, because people see your help. They seek your help when they need your help. It's not always. But for them to come back, I think it's a huge badge of honor. And there is a certain segment that does come back. And again, if it's due to lack of financial education, whatever, that's a different matter altogether. We need to recognize life happens. People's families grow. What they were 10 years ago is different than what they are today. So I think we need to just move into, again, our industry is maturing. We need to move into that realm that it's not a one and done type of deal. If you do a great job, which everyone on this call does a fantastic job helping people, we should feel good if people do come back. Not the next month, obviously that's bad, but in a few years' time is my point.
But now I think that's a brilliant touch point. But why do those consumers feel comfortable to come back? Because they've seen and they understand the process. It's worked for them. They've seen the beautiful part. How wonderful would it be if all South Africans felt that way, that we are their first point of call when they fall into troubles? So once again, consumer education is a major shouting point. And Tiaan, consumers phoning a PDA because they've got no clue sometimes where to contact. And once again, it's not the guys on this call. Benay, I'm sure you guys educate your consumers properly. If you're in trouble, this is our WhatsApp. You give them so many touch points. But what are we forgetting?
I just want to make one comment on this. Sorry, I'm interrupting. People call the PDA because that's what they see on the bank account. That's why they call you. That's as simple as that. No other reason. Because the debit order doesn't say Casper or Reinhardt or my name. it says hyphen or intuitive. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify that for
Correct.
whoever
And
might be listening.
I'm willing to say that, but now I'm sure you're willing to say it, Reinhardt. I'm 100% sure you're willing to say that. So let's start with us. We keep on pointing out, but let's start educating. PDAs, and they're more than willing. The PDAs have come on board in the last year so much. Here's our touch point for consumers. They're getting statements from PDAs. Why is our DECASA or NDA details not on there? Let's put a little disclaimer on there. If you've got an issue with your DC, here's the association they belong to. Here's their contact details. Please, if you're unsure because there is consumers that's unsure, they're getting it from me, but who says I'm telling them the truth? Here's my association. If we start that, consumers are going to start trusting associations. We're going to force those other guys to belong somewhere. And then they've got a touching point. Yes, they see the PDA's details on that, but they're also getting emailed statements. They're also getting their Form 16s. Yes, we rebrand all our things brilliantly by the bigger guys, but it must also be the smaller guys. I think we need to educate right through industry and even the credit providers. If you're saying there's a naughty boy out there, tell it if one of those naughty boys is one of my members. And let's take the lead and assist the debt counselor for 6 months. If they're not willing to come on board, let's throw them to the wolves, to the regulator. But let's first go out there and try and improve our industry within. Let's take hands with the smaller guys. Let's put the education to the consumer. We need to self-regulate as well. And that's the only way we're going to weed out unethical practices. Start with ourselves. Let's be the pillar of hope. Let's be the example out there. I think there should be mandatory feedback and a dispute resolution process in our industry. It's massively lacking. The regulator takes forever. I can't speak bad about my regulator because I'm one of its registrants, and the next thing you know, they're going to knock on my door 3 times a year because I'm compliant. But let's put it on so much education. Let's get the touching points there. The PDAs can massively assist us. If it wasn't for the PDAs, our whole industry would be dead. There will maybe be 1 or 2 big guys, but let's utilize those current tools out there. Let's educate the consumer, put it on as much documentation and feedback. You don't go to Alcoholics Anonymous because you don't have a drinking problem. The same should be, if I've got a problem with my debt counselor, go to my association. Let them help us assist. And I think that is the word we should get out there, that the first point of call when they see their statement is not to phone the PDA, it's to phone the association or the actual debt counselor. So once again, we must start pointing fingers to ourselves. Guys, we keep on complaining. Let's find solutions. It's not the good debt counselors making nonsense. It is the other guys, but let's be examples. Let's start with process plans. And thank you, Intuitive, for these type of discussions that we can put our brains together and find solutions to these difficult talking points. If we're going to say debt review is not a swear word, out lying to ourselves, but we have to change the narrative. And the only way we change it is education.
Some guys need to go. So we wanted to say to the guys that need to go, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast with these dummies and the panelists. I'm not going to call everybody a dummy, but thank you very much for joining us, you guys. I think we can talk about these things for the longest time. And for those who want us to hang around, maybe ask 1 or 2 questions. Thank you. But for those who need to go, thank you very much for joining us on today's.
Yeah, I think on my side, it's next. I think this thing is driving something. And I think maybe just from my side is making sure that anything we're discussing, how do we start putting actions against it? Or how do we start inviting more people? And I think that's the point. It doesn't necessarily need to be on a podcast, but I do think you guys have made some valid points. I think Zach is already busy with a few things of saying, listen, how do we make our industry more reputable? Some of the things that we are discussing, and that's now a few of us, is to see how do we get more information out there and how do we share that? Zach is looking at the data. We're still in our discussion phases, but how do we start sharing the good news story? And that doesn't necessarily mean per consumer. It might be a very high level. I think it's opening it up. Benay, you've also invited us to Sakra, which we're also very excited about. How do we start using the information to actually tell the good news story, making sure that people trust the process as we are going through it, and so that people don't see, so unfortunately, the people that complain or have been hurt in the process. We want to highlight the 250,000, 2 million people, Benay, that has gone through the process successfully, and not just the 1 or 2 people that have been hurt. Also, I think, Casper, to your point, is we want to actually ensure that we do have processes to deal with those people that are naughty.
Thank you very much.
Apologies, guys. I need to run to an audit.
That's okay. Thanks.
Benay, are you hanging around?
I do need to go in 2
Thank you
minutes.
very much. Final thoughts before you
So
go?
I think this industry is maturing. I think it needs version 2.0. Version 1.0 is, we've kind of sliced and diced it, but we've got to go back to the point. It's not even 20 years old. That's like nothing in longevity. It takes about 25 years for the industries to mature and get to a place. Version 2.0 for me looks leaner. There will be fewer participants. I think we just have to accept that many operations are subscale and will not survive. It must become more consumer centric by simplifying what we do, communicating what we do, and removing some of the noise for consumers. There's a simplification for the process needed in version 2.0. We need to better align the incentives and payoffs for everyone involved. That is not quite aligned, and that's part of the reason kind of work against each other. We're not all going to get what we want, but for me, I think that's where it starts. Having said all of that, I think the groundwork is there to make it like be knocked out of the park. As I mentioned to Zach before, I think we must dream big and try to get things like this, and particularly your awards, to become global, as we had discussed before, by incorporating all the different role players, bringing in credit bureaus, bringing in financial journalists, bringing in other participants of industry, and make it big and relabel it. Both review and counseling have bad connotations associated with it, guys. We just got to accept that. I think we need to think about the rebranding, and then things will happen, not magically, but that's my 2 cents, parting thoughts. The potential is huge. It will take time to get to it, but yeah, potential is big.
We really appreciate it tonight.
I wanted to ask you one more question. Do you think all debt counselors act in the best interest of all their consumers all the time?
The answer could be yes. I think that's why we have these discussions, isn't it? I think once debt counselors become desperate and you get in any industry the bad guys, and we keep pointing to them, but we must start with ourselves. The consumers should be at the heart of debt counseling. And then the credit provider. What is a debt counselor? Debt counselor is actually just a statutory creature facilitating the restructuring, keeping all parties happy. It's like the age-old thing about mediation. If everybody is a little bit unhappy, then you've done a good job. The fortunate thing about debt counseling is once we've done our job, all parties are happy. So how nice is that? Unfortunately, if you don't do it correctly with enough education at the heart of it, you're going to sit with an unhappy consumer. No, I don't think all debt counselors always look at the interest of the consumer or credit provider. And I think we should put ethics back into it. And that's the only way we're going to rebuild trust. So I think there should also be a stronger culture for referral. How do you refer something if there's no trust? So I think it all can be fixed by, well, maybe we should rebrand. Isn't that the thought of every 7 years, rebrand something and you see a new spark in life in it? Is it the time to rebrand debt review, debt restructuring, debt counseling? Let's make it nice and flashy and to the heart of the consumer's needs.
Okay, first of all, you mentioned, I mean, are debt counselors doing it in their interest or in the interest of the consumer? Now, unfortunately, there are a lot of debt counselors that are just doing it for themselves. All right, but once again, we are talking about that 5 to 10%. And I get that figure from you, Zach. You're probably right. If we can get all stakeholders to spend more time together, those are things where we can all work together.
Thanks,
That's pretty much
Thank you,
my
Ryan.
thoughts.
No, that's good.
But
Yeah.
does the association you belong to, the Debt Counsellors Association of South Africa, DECASA, have a current system in place where members step out of line and a consumer complains and it comes to the association? Is there anything like that at the moment?
There is a structure. I think it can be redefined, and we are busy working on it. The outset and the original thing, just like anything, the CASA also needed a bit of a rebrand, remotivation in why we are doing this. I think everybody in this industry just got fairly disheartened. Lots of bad things happened out there. With my vision and the rest of the NEC's vision, it is to uplift consumers and uplift our DCs from the small, medium guys. It's educated. We're doing a sterling job on our provincial side. We're hosting those conferences and also bringing a little bit of debt counseling training in it. Zach, you're doing a brilliant job on Thursdays for the smaller guys, but there's still people falling through the net. So I think as a collective, if we work together with the same stance and intention, we can really fix things and reinvigor the whole debt review space. I mean, I want to be proud of what I do. I want to be proud of being called a debt counselor. I think that was lacking from the Casper point of view. I think our intention is there. I think it is still a little bit lacking, but at this point, if debt counselors are naughty and we send them a letter, they just resign as a member, as simple as that. But I think it's because they don't know what the intention is. And I think we need to change that look and feel to the outside to say, listen, we're not here to shout at you or give you to the regulator. We're here to help as a helping hand. If we can change that mindset, we can pull a lot more DCs closer. And I'm starting to see that we're getting members signing up. We're getting members support that for a long time was just left outside. So if we can just keep growing, then I think we're going to get to that stage where we're going to be in a position, because obviously everything has to do with funding. I can't pay for somebody to go help pick somebody else if I'm running a loss. The more members we have, the more money we can funnel to assist our smaller guys, medium guys, or even the large guys that's chasing on, say, listen, just step back in line. Let's fix you. I think that's the bigger answer to it.
Well, Zach, I think if there's one thing we've seen today is there's a lot of work that we can do in our industry. Maybe a rebranding is on the card. What do you think, Zach?
Well, I do feel a little bit smarter than when we started this discussion. So maybe Debt Review with Smarties is on its way with the rebrand. Who knows? But I want to say thank you very much to all our guests. It was really nice to spend time with you. And thank you very much for sharing your opinions. You can see the good intent that we all have. So thank you for bringing that to our discussion today.
As always, I just wanted to say, Zach, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much to our panel. And thank you to our listeners. And we'll see you on the next episode of Intuitive Discussions with Dummies. And that's a wrap for today's episode of Intuitive Discussions with Dummies. If you found this helpful or even just a little interesting, do us a favor and hit that like and subscribe button for this YouTube channel, as well as the Debt Review with Dummies podcast channel. It really helps to keep these conversations going. A huge thank you to our main sponsor, IPDA, for making this podcast possible. If you or your business would like to become a sponsor, you'll find the details in the description below. We'd love to collaborate with you.